What's up? Finally here today, Final Fantasy Talk. Yes, today we're gonna talk about some fanboys and opinion haters or haters, whatever you want to call them. We're gonna talk about that today in Final Fantasy Talk. So today I got this topic off Twitter yesterday when I was talking to a few people about fanboys and haters, and people think fanboys and haters are the same thing. Now I'm just talking in the Final Fantasy community. I'm not talking about other communities like COD and whatever. I'm just strictly talking about the Final Fantasy community. Now, the thing is, there are fanboys everywhere. Everywhere you're gonna see fanboys. There's always gonna be fanboys on one subject, one topic of the fanboy they're fanboying on, and that is Final Fantasy VII in the Final Fantasy community. Yes, there are Final Fantasy VII fanboys in the Final Fantasy community. No duh there. But there's also haters, and haters are a complete different thing from a fanboy, because you can be a good fanboy. You know that I'm a fanboy. I'm a fanboy of Final Fantasy X. I'm a fanboy of Final Fantasy X. Okay, but I don't go around hating other people and bashing them because they don't like Final Fantasy X or their favorite game is not Final Fantasy X. I don't do that. But I'm a fanboy. I'm a fanboy of Final Fantasy X. Final Fantasy X is my favorite Final Fantasy game and my favorite Final Fantasy game, or favorite game out of all games in the world. Final Fantasy X is my favorite. Now the question is, why are there fanboys? There can't be good fanboys. Well, there are good fanboys. You could have your favorite game. You could have your favorite game and fanboy over it. You can be like, oh, I love this game. This is my favorite game of all time. This is the only game for me. You can do that. You can be like that if you want. But then there's another side of a fanboy. And the other side of a fanboy is called a hater. And a hater is basically like, oh, you don't like my favorite game? Oh, I hate you. You know, blah, 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 blah. You suck. You know, you like Final Fantasy 8. Oh, fuck you. Final Fantasy 12 is the best. Blah, blah, blah. You know, it's not all about Final Fantasy 7. I can tell you that for sure. Because a lot of people see the Final Fantasy community, and when they go into the Final Fantasy community, and when they see these people hate, all they think is Final Fantasy 7. That's all they think. All they think is Final Fantasy 7 is the main problem of this Final Fantasy fighting and hating. That's so very, very untrue. There are fanboy haters all over this community. All over the Final Fantasy community. Now, I'm not going to say fanboys. I'm going to say opinion haters. That's what I'm going to say. Opinion haters. There are opinion haters all over this community. It's not just Final Fantasy 7. You can get a Final Fantasy 9 opinion hater who really likes Final Fantasy 9. You can get that person as well. You can get 8, 10, 11, 12, even 4, back then in the day, 6. You can there's a group of people in each Final Fantasy game, and there's always going to be those people who have their favorite game and are going to hate on other people because their favorite game is not the same as their favorite game. It's not just Final Fantasy 7. It can be 8, 9, 10, all the Final Fantasy games. Hell, even Final Fantasy 14 and Realm Reborn I've seen it now. Even Final Fantasy 15, the game hasn't even bloody came out yet. You know, it's ridiculous, and I'm just saying, from my point of view and my opinion, I'm just saying that to the people who bitch about whining about, you know, to the people who bitch and think the only problem in this community is Final Fantasy 7 and the only problem and all we get is Final Fantasy 7, you are very wrong. That's not the only thing. You are right. That is one of the things, but that's one of the very few small things. Final Fantasy 7 is not the main problem in Final Fantasy community. There are so many other things that people don't realize, like opinion haters all over each community, people who are leaving the Final Fantasy community because they're not getting what they want or whatever. People joining the Final Fantasy community then getting hated on by other people because the new people don't know what to do in Final Fantasy, but some other people don't like to help and like to call people dumbasses because they're learning and they're learning about Final Fantasy. But nobody, I'm not saying nobody, but I'm saying a majority of people are hating on the new people that come into the Final Fantasy community because they just don't know about the Final Fantasy game or what to do. They're learning to play Final Fantasy, and they're learning to enjoy Final Fantasy. Don't you see that? You're not gonna pick up a game and know it right away. You're not gonna do that. That's, if you could do, some people can do that, yeah, but the majority of people can't do that. They need to play the game, they need to learn it. Sure, they might ask a few questions or whatever, not knowing it, but don't hate on them. They're new people in the Final Fantasy community, and that's what we want. We want new people in the Final Fantasy community that will enjoy the Final Fantasy community, that will enjoy Final Fantasy and won't hate. That's what we're trying to do. But when the new people come around and when the haters see the new people, they're just gonna hate on them. Then the new people are gonna leave, and we're the same community as we are right now. We are a small community. I'm not saying that that's not a bad thing, not saying it's a good thing, but we are small. This Final Fantasy community is small compared to other communities. Now, I'm not hating on my own community. I love the Final Fantasy community, don't get me wrong, but I want to see positive in the Final Fantasy community. I want to see pluses. I want to see no minuses, no negativity. I want to see happiness. Now, I know you can't get happiness 100% in any community, in anything really, but I'm going to say this, okay? From out of 10, 1 out of 10, how positive our community is, I would say 5. It's 50-50. I would say positive 50, negative 50. And to be what I would really want to see in the Final Fantasy community would be, I don't know, 70% positive and 30% negative. If we could do that and get more people in the Final Fantasy community and enjoy Final Fantasy with everybody, that would be awesome. I think, some people are probably shaking their head at me right now while listening to this. But you never know how to stop the haters. Well, I don't know. If new people do come in the Final Fantasy community, I guess somebody has to be there to say, hey, heads up, there are haters in this community. Don't listen to what they say. Just enjoy yourself. Enjoy yourself and meet the people that respect your opinion, respect that you're learning about Final Fantasy, and respect that you are, you have your own favorite Final Fantasy game, and don't hate. You need to find those people in the Final Fantasy community. You need to find, the part of the Final Fantasy community where you belong, because there's parts in the Final Fantasy community that there's a lot of parts, there's a lot of groups of people in the Final Fantasy community. You need to find the right one that fits you. For me, I would say that I'm mainly a Final Fantasy YouTuber commentator for Final Fantasy. That's why I look at myself, and my favorite game is Final Fantasy X, so I would go lean more to the Final Fantasy X people, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. I'm just doing what I enjoy, and this is what I'm doing. I'm talking to you Kupos about some of the problems and some of the things we can do in the Final Fantasy community. Anyway, Kupos, you let me know in the comments below what you think about this. Do you think somehow, some way, we can just kind of change the positive to like 70% and change the negativity to 30%? Or do you think it's just too much work? Do you think it's just never gonna work for the Final Fantasy community? Do you think Square is the only one that can fix this? Because I said that before. I'm like, okay, Square is the only one that can fix it. Square is the, makers of Final Fantasy. They can do something about this, can't they? And after I said that, after that video I made, I'm like, well, Square's just making the Final Fantasy games. it's the fans that are doing all this to the Final Fantasy community. We can't do that. Square can't do that. You know, maybe they could somehow, but that's really hard. And I personally think I came up with this idea, but a Final Fantasy network. A Final Fantasy network. And when I mean a Final Fantasy network, I mean like a network, like not like Machinima or IGN or, you know, stuff like that, but somewhat like that. That a network that revolves all over Final Fantasy, you know, on YouTube or whatever. Final Fantasy YouTubers. For a Final Fantasy network for Final Fantasy YouTubers. I think that would be brilliant, and I think a lot of people would start getting along, work together on YouTube, work on videos together, work on whatever together to make this community more positive. So anyway, Kubos, you let me know in the comments below what you think about this. Do you think, you know, is this possible? Is this possible? You let me know in the comments below, Kubos. And, yeah, so, you know, just shared my opinion. Just want to talk about that a little bit. And, yeah, so, anyway, Kubos, hope you enjoyed. I'm Final, and I'm out. Kubo, see ya!